I used to believe competence would be rewarded, but when I refused to train the incompetent wife of our powerful CEO, I was fired after a 7-minute Zoom call. 6 months later, that same CEO stood trembling before cameras as his wife, now under federal fraud investigation, blamed everything on one person. This is the story of how I turned a pink slip into a $71 million counterstrike. My name is Danielle Moore, and at 35, I thought I'd built something unshakable at Stonebrook Capital. As head of financial strategy at one of Austin's most aggressive venture capital firms, I'd spent 4 years crafting algorithms that could predict market shifts with eerie accuracy. My team respected me. My models had saved our investors millions. I believed in meritocracy the way some people believe in gravity as an immutable law of the professional universe. That delusion shattered on a Tuesday morning when Marcus Chen, our CEO, strolled into my office with his wife trailing behind him like an expensive accessory. "Danielle, meet Lila," he said, his smile too wide, too practiced. "She's joining our strategic initiatives team." Lila Croft stood there in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, examining her manicured nails with the kind of studied disinterest that only comes from never having to prove yourself. She didn't extend her hand. She barely looked at me. "When did she interview?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Marcus's smile flickered. "Lila brings a unique perspective. Sometimes fresh eyes see what experience misses." Fresh eyes, that's what he called it. Not nepotism, not a vanity hire. Fresh eyes. "I'd like you to take her under your wing," he continued. "Show her our risk assessment protocols, the forecasting models, everything." I studied Lila, who was now scrolling through her phone. During our brief interaction, she hadn't asked a single question about the role, the team, or our objectives. She radiated the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no spoken above a whisper. "Of course," I said, though something cold settled in my stomach. "When would you like to start?" "Now would be perfect," Lila finally spoke, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone addressing the help. "I have a hard stop at 3 for Pilates." Over the next 2 days, I tried. God, how I tried. I walked Lila through our proprietary models, explained the mathematical foundations, demonstrated how subtle market indicators could cascade into major trend shifts. She spent most of the time texting, occasionally interrupting to ask if we could make the graphs prettier or suggesting we should follow our intuition more. When I showed her a complex arbitrage opportunity I'd identified that could net us 12% returns, she laughed, actually laughed. "This is all so mechanical," she said, waving dismissively at my screens full of carefully calibrated data. "Where's the creativity, the vision?" "The vision is not losing our clients' money," I replied, my patience finally fraying. Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe that's why you're stuck in middle management." "Middle management," I bit back my response, but that night, I made my decision. The next morning, I walked into Marcus's office. "I can't train Lila," I said simply. "She lacks the fundamental knowledge needed for this role. More importantly, she has no interest in learning." Marcus's face darkened. "That's disappointing. Danielle, I thought you were a team player." "I am. That's exactly why I'm telling you this. Putting her in charge of strategic decisions could cost us millions." "I'll take that under advisement," he said, his tone suggesting he'd take it straight to the trash. 3 days later, at 8:47 a.m. on a Friday, my computer chimed with a meeting request. Subject: organizational restructuring. Time: 9 a.m. Mandatory attendance. I knew before I clicked accept. You develop a sixth sense for corporate executions. The Zoom call lasted exactly 7 minutes. HR spoke in rehearsed euphemisms about new directions and strategic realignments. Marcus didn't even have the courtesy to appear on camera. By 9:10, my access to every system was revoked. By 9:15, security was at my desk with a cardboard box. 4 years of work, dissolved in 7 minutes. But the real betrayal came later, when a former colleague risked their job to send me screenshots from the company's internal newsletter. There was Lila Croft, smiling from the page, credited as the architect of the GRIA core system, my system, built with my code, my algorithms, my sleepless nights. They hadn't just fired me, they'd erased me. Standing in my apartment, Staring at those screenshots, I felt something shift inside me. The naive belief in fairness didn't die. It transformed into something harder, sharper. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them what 4 years of risk assessment had taught me about identifying vulnerabilities. They'd made just one mistake. They'd assumed I was as disposable as they'd treated me. They were wrong. The screenshots kept coming. My former colleague, who insisted I call them Bird in our encrypted messages, sent me evidence of my complete erasure from Stonebrook's history. Every presentation I'd created now bore Lila Croft's name. The risk assessment framework I'd spent 18 months perfecting, developed by L. Croft, strategic innovation lead. Even the AI-powered spreadsheets with my comments embedded in the code had been clumsily scrubbed and reattributed. But it was the trade publication feature that made my hands shake with rage. There was Lila, gracing the cover of FinTech Quarterly, under the headline, "The Prodigy Revolutionizing Risk Assessment." The article gushed about her intuitive approach to financial modeling and her groundbreaking GRID core system. My system, my name for it, Grid Resource Intelligence Design. I'd named it after the interconnected patterns I saw in market data, like a vast electrical grid pulsing with information. Now she was claiming she'd conceived it during a moment of inspiration while practicing hot yoga. I threw my laptop across the room. It survived. I wasn't sure I would. For 3 weeks, I spiraled. I'd spent 4 years building something I believed in, only to watch it stolen by someone who couldn't explain the difference between standard deviation and variance. The rejection emails from other firms started piling up. Word travels fast in Austin's financial circles, and Marcus had clearly poisoned the well. Then, at 2:30 a.m. on a sleepless Tuesday, I remembered something that made me sit bolt upright. The external drives. During the early development of GRID, I'd been paranoid about system crashes. I'd backed up everything on my personal encrypted drives, not company property, purchased with my own money, used during the countless unpaid overtime hours I donated to perfection. Every iteration, every algorithm, every breakthrough and failure was documented there, time-stamped, with my digital signature woven into the code itself. I pulled the drives from my closet safe and connected them with shaking hands. Everything was there, not just the code, but development logs, email chains where I'd explained concepts to Marcus that he'd clearly never understood. Even video recordings of late-night coding sessions I'd made to track my thought process. More importantly, I had the original, complete version of GRID core, including the security patches and stress test results that I'd been finalizing before my termination. The version Lila was peddling was 3 iterations old, full of vulnerabilities I'd identified but hadn't yet fixed. Bird's next message confirmed my suspicions. They're rushing to market, LC presenting at Finance Forward Conference next month, promising institutional rollout Q3. I stared at the message, a cold smile spreading across my face. They weren't just using my work, they were using an unfinished, dangerous version of it. In their haste to monetize my creation, they'd skipped the boring parts, the testing, the safeguards, the endless debugging that made the difference between a tool and a weapon. One more thing, Bird's message continued. It knows there are problems, raised concerns about data integrity issues. LC shut them down, said the system was extensively tested by the developer, meaning you. They're setting you up as the fall guy if anything goes wrong. I closed my eyes, feeling the last of my hesitation evaporate. They weren't content with stealing my work and destroying my career. They were preparing to blame me for their incompetence. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to a lawyer specializing in intellectual property, a friend from college who'd always said I should patent my innovations. The second was to Amira Fields. Amira and I had met at a cybersecurity conference 3 years ago. While I built systems to predict market behavior, she built systems to detect when people were lying about market behavior. Her firm, Sierra Nova Audits, had exposed a dozen fraudulent hedge funds. She answered on the second ring. "Danielle Moore," she said, and I could hear her smile. "I was wondering when you'd call. Saw that ridiculous article about Stonebrook's new prodigy. Nearly choked on my coffee." "How would you like to choke on something bigger?" I asked. "Like evidence of intellectual property theft and potential securities fraud." The pause was brief. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? Name the place. As I hung up, I looked at my wall of certifications and awards, now seeming like relics from another life. They'd taken my present and were trying to steal my future, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing I'd spent 4 years learning to identify risk patterns and exploit market weaknesses. And they'd just revealed theirs. The coffee shop where I met Amira sat tucked between 2 glass towers in downtown Austin, the kind of place where deals were whispered over cortados and entire careers could pivot on a single conversation. She arrived at exactly 10 a.m., punctual as always, her presence commanding attention despite her understated navy suit. "Show me," she said simply, after we'd secured a corner table. I pulled out my laptop and the external drives. For the next hour, I walked her through everything: the development logs, the time-stamped code, the evolution of GRID, core from concept to near completion. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes when I showed her the metadata proving I'd written 96% of the codebase on my personal equipment. "This is comprehensive," she said finally, "but why didn't you patent it?" I laughed bitterly. I was naive. I thought being invaluable to the company was better than legal protection. Besides, I developed most of it on my own time, planning to propose it as a joint venture. I have the draft proposal here, dated 6 months ago. Never got the chance to present it. Amira leaned back, fingers steepled. "And the version they're using? 3 iterations old, missing critical security patches." I pulled up the comparison. "See this vulnerability in the risk calculation module? Without the fix, it compounds rounding errors in high-volume transactions. Fine for demonstrations, catastrophic for real portfolios." How catastrophic? In stress tests, it showed phantom gains of up to 12%, while actually losing 3%, the kind of error that could wipe out millions before anyone noticed. Amira's smile was sharp. "And you have documentation of these flaws? Every bug, every fix, every warning I tried to give before they showed me the door." I showed her the email chains where I'd flagged concerns, each one dismissed or ignored. They didn't just steal unfinished work, they stole a loaded weapon and are waving it around like a toy. "What do you want?" "Danielle, revenge, justice, your job back." I met her gaze. "I want the truth known. I want my work back. And I want them to pay for trying to bury me." "Then we need to be strategic. First, we document everything. I mean everything, every file, every timestamp, every piece of evidence that proves you're the creator. Then we wait. Wait. For them to deploy it publicly. Right now, it's internal theft. Once they start selling services based on your system, it becomes wire fraud, securities fraud, if they misrepresent its capabilities to investors." She tapped her phone. "The Finance Forward conference is in 6 weeks. That gives us time to build an airtight case." Over the following weeks, I transformed my apartment into a war room. Amira introduced me to a forensic data analyst who helped verify the authenticity of my files. My lawyer began drafting cease and desist letters, ready to deploy at the perfect moment. But most importantly, I created a demonstration, a side-by-side comparison of my complete GRR core versus the compromised version Stonebrook was peddling. The nightmares had stopped. Every morning, I woke with purpose. They'd tried to erase me, but instead, they'd freed me from corporate loyalty. I was no longer building for a company. I was building my case. Bird kept feeding me intelligence. Lila was struggling, demanding the IT team fix bugs without understanding they were fundamental flaws. Marcus was growing nervous, but had invested too much reputation in his wife's success to back down. They'd already promised 3 major clients early access to the system. "They're doubling down," Bird reported in one encrypted message. "LC brought in consultants to enhance the system. They have no idea what they're working with." I smiled at my screens, surrounded by evidence and ammunition. Let them dig deeper. Every move they made, every lie they told, every corner they cut, it all became part of my documentation. The old Danielle would have felt guilty, would have worried about the collateral damage, but they'd killed that version of me in a 7-minute Zoom call. What remained was someone who understood that in the financial world, information was power, and I had 4 years' worth they'd overlooked in their arrogance. "Are you ready for this?" Amira asked during our final preparation meeting. Once we go public, there's no going back. They'll try to destroy you. I thought of Lila's dismissive laugh, of Marcus's condescending smile, of the security guard escorting me out with my cardboard box of belongings. I thought of my name erased from years of work, my future sacrificed for nepotism and ego. They already tried, I said. They failed. The USB drive in my hand contained everything the real core, the evidence, the proof of what they'd done. It felt heavier than its few grams, weighted with possibility and retribution. In 6 weeks, Lila Croft would take the stage at Finance Forward. She thought she'd be presenting my work as her own triumph. Instead, she'd be walking into an ambush 4 years in the making. The Finance Forward conference arrived like a storm I'd been tracking on radar. From my apartment, I watched the live stream as Lila Croft took the stage in a white designer suit, her confidence radiating through the screen. Behind her, my work, my algorithms, my visualizations, my innovations filled the massive display. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the future of risk assessment, she began, her voice carrying that practiced enthusiasm of someone reciting memorized lines. The aita core system represents a paradigm shift in how we understand market vulnerabilities. I took notes as she butchered the technical explanations, mixing up basic concepts while the audience of financial professionals nodded politely. But they were buying it. Why wouldn't they? Stonebrook Capital had a stellar reputation, and Marcus stood in the front row like a proud husband at a recital. Then came the live demonstration. Let me show you how GID Core can transform your portfolio management, Lila announced, pulling up a beta version on screen. We've partnered with the Hartwell Foundation to pilot this system with their endowment fund. My blood ran cold. The Hartwell Foundation managed educational funds for underprivileged students, nearly $40 million in scholarships and grants. Bird hadn't mentioned this. I watched in horror as Lila input real portfolio data into the flawed system. The vulnerability I'd identified began its insidious work immediately. But dressed in my polished interface, the phantom gains looked convincing. The system showed a projected 12% return on a conservative bond strategy that should have yielded 3% at best. As you can see, Lila beamed, GRID Core identifies opportunities your traditional models miss. My phone buzzed. Amira. This is it. They're using it for real money. Document everything. Over the next 2 weeks, the catastrophe unfolded in slow motion. The Hartwell Foundation, impressed by the projections, shifted $8 million based on GRRD Core's recommendations. Other nonprofits followed suit. Lila gave interviews about democratizing advanced financial tools and empowering smaller institutions. Then the first cracks appeared. Bird's message came at 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Hartwell discovered discrepancies. Down $600,000 in 2 weeks, but systems still showing gains. By morning, the financial press had picked up the story. Questions arise about Stonebrook's new risk system, read the cautious headline in the Wall Street Journal, but on financial Twitter, the tone was less forgiving. Someone had leaked internal emails showing Hartwell's actual losses versus GRID Core's projections. I waited for Stonebrook to pull the system, to admit the error, to protect their clients. Instead, they doubled down. Marcus gave a press conference that afternoon, Lila at his side. We stand behind GRD Core completely, he announced. These are short-term market fluctuations. The system's long-term projections remain sound. But Lila looked shaken. For the first time, I saw fear crack through her polished exterior. When a reporter asked about the mathematical basis for the risk calculations, she fumbled, deflecting to proprietary algorithms and competitive advantages. The coup de grace came from an unexpected source, a PhD student at MIT, analyzing the public demo for her dissertation, published a blog post titled Fatal Flaws in Stonebrook's Core. She'd identified 3 of the vulnerabilities I'd documented: showing exactly how the system created phantom gains while hiding real losses. Her conclusion was damning. This system appears to be an incomplete beta version, deployed prematurely without proper testing. The mathematical errors suggest fundamental misunderstandings of risk modeling. The post went viral in financial circles. By market close, Stonebrook's stock had dropped 12%. 3 clients publicly announced they were suspending use of GRIE core pending investigation. Bird's next message was brief. LC blaming original developer for leaving hidden flaws. Legal preparing statements putting responsibility on you. They're saying you sabotaged it before leaving. I stared at the message, fury and vindication warring in my chest. They were following the playbook I'd predicted, but now they'd given me the opening I needed. That evening, Amira called. You seeing this disaster? Every beautiful moment of it. They're going to blame you tomorrow. My sources say they're preparing a statement naming you as the developer who was terminated for incompetence. Let them, I said, pulling up my files. Are you ready to return fire? Sierra Nova's report is complete. 40 pages documenting the theft, the flaws, and the cover-up. We've got 3 major news outlets ready to run with it. I looked at the photo Lila had posted that morning on LinkedIn, her standing proudly next to a GRID core display at Stonebrook's offices, captioned, Innovation Requires Courage. The comments section was already filling with questions about the Hartwell losses. Send it, I said. All of it. Tomorrow, when they tried to paint me as the villain, they'd discover I'd been documenting their crime for 6 weeks. Every lie, every theft, every reckless decision that put millions at risk, I had it all. They thought they'd buried me. Instead, they'd armed me. The war was about to begin, and I had receipts. The next morning, Stonebrook's statement hit the wire services at 6 a.m. sharp. I was already awake, coffee in hand, watching it populate across financial news sites. Stonebrook Capital has identified critical flaws in the GRD core system that appear to be the result of deliberate sabotage by a former employee, Danielle Moore, terminated for performance issues, left hidden vulnerabilities in the code that have resulted in calculation errors. We are pursuing all legal remedies against Miss Moore for this act of corporate sabotage. Performance issues. Sabotage. They'd actually done it. Tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-employee who'd booby-trapped her own creation. But they'd made one crucial error. They'd finally admitted I was the developer. My phone erupted with calls from reporters, but I ignored them all. Amira and I had choreographed this next part down to the minute. At exactly 8 a.m., Sierra Nova Audits released their independent report. The title was Clinical Technical Analysis of Intellectual Property Misappropriation, the GRID Core Case Study, but the contents were explosive. 40 pages of time-stamped evidence, code comparisons, and development logs proving I'd created GRID Core independently. The report included screenshots of the flawed version Stonebrook was using versus my completed build, showing they'd deployed an outdated iteration without the critical security patches I'd developed. Most damning was Section 7. Evidence suggests Stonebrook Capital knowingly deployed incomplete software while misrepresenting its capabilities to clients and investors. This constitutes potential securities fraud under SEC regulations. By 9 a.m., Who Built Grid was trending on financial Twitter. The MIT student who'd first identified the flaws retweeted Sierra Nova's report with a simple comment. This explains everything. They stole unfinished homework and failed the test. Then I made my move. I'd scheduled a Twitter Spaces session for 9:30 a.m., announced only an hour before. The real developer of GRII Core. A conversation with Danielle Moore. 20,000 people joined within minutes. Good morning, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. My name is Danielle Moore. I spent 4 years developing the GRID core system. Today, Stonebrook Capital accused me of sabotaging my own creation. I'm here to set the record straight. For the next hour, I walked through the evidence. I shared screen recordings of my development process, showed the original code with my digital signatures, displayed the emails where I'd warned about the vulnerabilities in the older versions. I explained, in simple terms, how the mathematical errors in Stonebrook's version were creating phantom gains. "I want to be clear," I said. "The version Stonebrook is using is 3 iterations old. It's not sabotaged, it's unfinished. I was terminated before I could implement the fixes. They took incomplete work, slapped a new name on it, and sold it as revolutionary technology." The questions came fast and fierce. Reporters, analysts, even some Stonebrook clients who joined anonymously. I answered them all, armed with 4 years of documentation. Then came the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you have a working version?" "Yes," I said simply. "The complete GRID core system, with all security patches and safety protocols. I developed it on my own time, on my own equipment. It has never been Stonebrook's property." The implications hung in the air. I had what they needed to fix their catastrophe, but it was mine, not theirs. By noon, the SEC had announced a formal investigation into Stonebrook Capital. The Hartwell Foundation publicly demanded a full audit of their losses. 3 more clients announced they were pulling their funds. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. At 2:15 p.m., a group of Stonebrook employees released a joint statement on LinkedIn. 17 members of the IT and development teams confirmed they'd raised concerns about GRID Core's flaws, but were overruled by management. They corroborated my timeline and confirmed that Lila Croft had demanded all attribution be changed to her name. Bird was one of the signatories. Their real name was Jamie Chen, senior systems analyst, and they'd risked everything to speak truth. Marcus tried damage control with an emergency investor call at 3 p.m. I listened to the leaked audio as he attempted to spin the narrative, but his voice cracked when an investor asked directly, "Did your wife steal Danielle Moore's work?" The pause lasted 6 seconds. In the financial world, 6 seconds of silence was a confession. By market close, Stonebrook had lost 38% of its value. The hashtag had evolved. Gridgate was trending globally. Financial podcasters were calling it the Theranos of trading algorithms. That evening, my lawyer called. "They want to talk, off the record." "No. Danielle. They're desperate. The SEC is circling. Clients are fleeing." "Good," I interrupted. "They had every chance to do the right thing. They chose this path." I hung up and returned to my screens. Tomorrow, I would file my lawsuit: intellectual property theft, defamation, and fraud. Amira had connected me with a firm that specialized in David versus Goliath cases, and they smelled blood in the water. But tonight, I watched the empire that had tried to bury me begin its collapse. Every refresh brought new headlines, new revelations, new confirmations of what I'd known all along. They'd stolen from the wrong person, and now, the bill was coming due. The lawsuit filing hit the news cycle like a precision-guided missile. $71 million in damages calculated down to the cent based on lost earnings, stolen intellectual property, defamation, and punitive damages. My legal team had crafted a masterpiece of litigation, but it was the evidence package that made headlines. "Former Stonebrook developer reveals smoking gun audio," screamed the Business Insider headline. I'd saved everything, including a voice memo from a development meeting where I'd explicitly warned about the risks in the unpatched version. In the recording, you could hear Lila dismissing my concerns with a laugh, saying, "We're not building a spaceship. Danielle, stop overcomplicating things." The public response was swift and brutal. Stonebrook's clients didn't just withdraw funds, they filed their own lawsuits, the Hartwell Foundation, having lost nearly $2 million following GRID Core's phantom projections, sued for gross negligence and fraud. Within a week, Stonebrook faced over $200 million in legal claims. Then Lila made a fatal mistake. In a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, she agreed to a live interview on CNBC. Sitting across from a journalist known for eviscerating corporate fraudsters, she tried to play victim. "I trusted the development team," she said, tears threatening her perfect makeup. "When concerns were raised, I was assured by our former head of strategy that the system was sound. If anyone should be blamed, it's Danielle Moore for abandoning her responsibilities." The journalist's smile was shark-like. "But Ms. Croft, we have emails showing Ms. Moore was terminated 3 weeks before you claimed to have developed GRID Core. How could she abandon something you allegedly created? Lila froze for 5 excruciating seconds. She stared at the camera like a deer in headlights. Then she did something even worse. She doubled down. Danielle was a troubled employee with delusions of ownership. She's trying to steal credit for my innovation. That's when I released the video. During those late-night development sessions, I'd recorded myself working through complex problems, a habit from my graduate school days. One particular video, time-stamped 18 months before my termination, showed me at my home desk at 2:43 a.m., walking through the core algorithm that powered GRID. The key insight, Passme explained to the camera, is treating market volatility like an electrical grid under load. Each node represents a risk factor.